Hello and welcome. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Steph.
And we are your hosts for the Star Trek Deep Space Nine Parmak cast.
Parmak, of course, being the Klingon word for love.
Because on this podcast, we believe that love will save the world.
And that the Deep Space Nine crew are all in a massive polyamorous relationship web.
That too. Thank you all so much for joining us today for Season 1, Episode 4, our discussion of Babel.
Happily Babel.
How are you doing today, Steph?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I am doing good. I'm excited to be here with you talking about some Trek this fine morning.
We love to do it.
We love to chat the Trek. Thank you guys all again so much for coming back to join us. I assume that there are some of you out there still on the journey with us. We're not just shouting into the void. We'll see if that bears out. And today we are discussing a very interesting episode, I would say, of Deep Space Nine, Episode 4, Babel. What did we think of this episode overall, Steph?
I think it's such a great ensemble piece.
That is a great way to describe it. Yeah, I think I completely agree. It uses so much of the strengths of the ensemble we have assembled. It feels very much like an original series episode to me in that way.
Yes, I was thinking that too, actually. A lot of the plot points, and we'll talk about this more, but
yes,
feel very
and sort of
TOS-y.
I know that this is the kind of episode that I think a lot of Deep Space Nine fans are sort of like, oh, it's a lot of like the early silliness. It doesn't have the maturity of some of the later whatever, but first of all, silly is so deeply ingrained in Star Trek's DNA.
You gotta be silly.
You gotta
We have
just
to stay
embrace
silly
the
with it.
silliness. And
You
this
gotta.
is very that where it's like, oh no, something's on the ship, and now we gotta
We gotta deal with
that's
it.
like the first 8 episodes of TOS is like
That's
all
generous.
just that.
Saying just 8 is generous.
And
And I say that with all the love in my heart
absolutely,
for TOS.
of course. And so that is fun to get to experience a little bit of that old Star Trek DNA alive and well in 1993, the future.
The future.
So before we dive into our recap and discussion, let's try and nail down what flavor of episode do we have here. And this one is definitely less clear-cut than the first two.
Yeah. I think because it's an ensemble piece.
Yes,
yeah.
definitely. And so I felt like watching when we started out, it is very much the Irishman must suffer.
Lord, he suffering.
Lord, he be suffering. And it really ends on that note as well.
Ties it up in a nice suffering bow.
But it doesn't really feel like that's the whole of the episode.
I agree.
I had in my notes also the word ensemble, it feels very much like an ensemble piece. And I also noted they all sort of get to do a little bit of their thing, right? Where O'Brien suffers, Ben is station dad, Bashir does Bashir's anatomy, Kira talks to terrorists, Jake wears a jumpsuit, Quark and Odo do their odd couple routine.
They do, to great effect.
To great effect. They are really the breakout stars of this episode.
They are. It's so fun.
So I guess we would say that this is an ensemble.
Yeah.
Unless you...
I like ensemble.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
gang's all here.
The gang's all here.
The
gang's
gang
all
does
queer.
the Star Trek. The gang's all queer.
And that's certainly wound into the DNA of this episode.
As with all Trek.
Yeah, true. Okay, all right. So we'll call this an ensemble piece for now, and then we'll see if we come up with anything better. Listeners, if you have any thoughts about what this could perhaps be classified as, let us know. Because I think there could be something, but I can't quite put my finger on it. So
We'll see where we get.
yeah. All right, so we are talking about, as I said, Deep Space Nine Season 1, Episode 4, Babel. This episode was directed by Paul Lynch, teleplay by Michael McGreevy and Naren Shankar, released on January 24th, 1993, a Sunday.
And we open on Chief O'Brien and his crew at the docking pylon, trying to free several civilians who are stuck in a jammed airlock. A Boslick freighter captain, Jahil, interrupts to complain that O'Brien hasn't yet fixed his ship's antimatter flow converter, and if his ship is left in dock for too long, the perishable goods aboard will spoil. Jahil exits, telling O'Brien that his best hardly seems good enough.
Which, like...
Leave O'Brien
Leave
alone.
him alone, man. This
Leave
one
him
man
alone.
is responsible for this entire giant bicycle wheel in space. Like,
I just get so defensive of my man O'Brien.
yeah. This, like, tired Paul Giamatti-looking alien really needs to just, like, take a chill pill. It's also, like, there's a bunch of people stuck in an elevator.
That seems
He's
more
busy
pressing.
being the building super about that, and...
Well, it's also, like, a lot more immediate. Like, if they're in there long enough, will they suffocate?
I don't know. Probably not, but it does feel like there's a sense of urgency.
It's more immediate than your ship. Sorry,
I would not
dude.
want to be stuck in there that long, certainly.
And so he's dealing with that, and then he is summoned to the science lab by Dax, where an incessant whine has been coming from her equipment. And I just love the moment when Dax calls him, he looks to the heavens.
Yeah.
And you can practically hear him like, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.
Yeah, it's really good. And so he goes to the science lab to fix the issue with Dax's equipment and simultaneously knocks out the lights while he manages to fix that, which is a great little beat. And then Miles rushes to Ops to repair the navigational computer for Major Kira. So he's just having a time.
He's
and
busy.
I love that DS9 is sometimes just a workplace sitcom, like the way that it can sort of hop genres and hop tone. Because, like, there are some very serious moments in this episode, but, like, this opening is very, very much just like a 80s workplace sitcom. And it works well.
It
like
does. I think Colm Meaney is part of that.
Yes,
like his long suffering.
He's so well suited to just slide into that and like take on the characteristics of whatever he's been given.
So just as he's thought he's earned 5 minutes peace and quiet, Commander Sisko gags on a mug of coffee delivered by the Ops replicator and asks the chief why it hasn't been fixed yet.
Love the cups. Beautiful cups.
Great cups. Jamie actually has a very similar mug in their possession.
I'm drinking coffee right now out of a mug from the mug company that made a bunch of the props for DS9. This is not the exact one that we get in this episode, but it is pretty close, and I'm enjoying it a lot.
It looks fantastic. O'Brien is like, oh, yeah, let me just get on that. Can't have the operations chief sitting around daydreaming when there's work to be done. He's so fucking done.
Yeah, he's crashing out a little bit.
He's crashing
real.
out hard. And Sisko and Kira kind of exchange a look at how he reacts.
And so we have O'Brien. He's fixing the replicators. After he finishes fixing them, he requests his standard coffee order, black, double sweet, as a test. And it seems to taste fine, but behind the panel, a mysterious electronic device activates and starts sending a signal into the replicator. And just like, man, Miles simply cannot catch a break. No one suffers like the Irish.
Truly. I have to say, I'm always such a sucker for like the inner workings.
Oh yeah,
like,
100%.
There's stuff bubbling, there's neon, like, oh, this is science,
well,
baby.
you only know it's the future when there's neon.
Yeah,
if there's
that's how you
not
tell.
neon, it's not high tech.
It's just science.
And I love when it's like big enough that they have to like crawl physically inside of it to like mess around with the innards. That's
Classic.
always good.
And we hit our theme song on this
Na, 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 na. And then we open back up on Quark's, where Quark and Odo are sitting together at a nearly empty bar discussing how slow the business has been lately. And I just have to say, Odo literally just came in here to make fun of him, which I really enjoy. Like, I bet this man has make fun of Quark as a recurring event in his calendar, and he just gets his notification and goes, and it's the best hour of Quark's day, to be honest.
They both look forward to it.
And so as they're just, you know, having a key, an angry customer yells down the bar at Quark, and he's complaining about his terrible Colonese stew and attempts to force feed it to Quark, which I thought was a really great moment.
It was an interesting bit.
yeah. And I really enjoy this alien man's fin beard.
It's a
I
good
just thought
look.
that was like something
Great
I wanted to
design
note.
look, yeah.
I love when they take like a fin or a gill or a claw or like anything that's like sort of alien and style it like hair or something. Like I always think that's a fun design moment.
Yes. So Odo uses a nerve pinch on the alien customer to rescue his boyfriend. I just want to say, why does Odo know how to do a Vulcan nerve pinch?
Odo
Where did he learn
is so
this?
skilled in all forms of space karate that I also couldn't tell if it was supposed to be a Vulcan nerve pinch because, like, obviously when you're watching, that's what you're going to think of. But I noted the guy doesn't seem to pass out. He just seems like he's in, like, a lot of pain.
Oh, maybe he's just, okay.
He's either just, like, grabbing him or Odo's fully trying to do that and doesn't know how to do it correctly.
Instead of unconscious, he's just, like, in a lot of pain.
Yeah. I was like, well, mission accomplished still.
Either way,
Odo doesn't really care about police brutality, which
No,
is
he
one of
doesn't.
his flaws as a goo. But
That's for another day.
that's what we're here for, is to grow and change. We'll circle back to him on that.
But regardless, he gets the customer to stop, and he recommends to Quark that he ask O'Brien to fix his replicators, since he's got the replicators on the command level working again. But he teasingly warns that O'Brien is a very busy man. He kind of even does this like, chuckle.
The famous Odo scoff.
Yes.
And after Odo leaves the bar, Quark breaks into the computer system for the station using his supply of stolen isolinear rods to access a map of the station's already repaired replicators.
And I really love that he keeps these stolen, like, high security clearance rods in just a little drawer
Just a
at
little
the bar.
pull drawer. Yeah, there's
Fully
not
accessible.
even a key.
There's not a lock. It could absolutely be reached by customers.
And you know that he has more security than that on, like, his liquor cabinet because he knows that, like, the Ferengi waiters are going to drink him out of house and home. But
Priorities.
the high security isolinear rods, they're just, it's because anybody might need them at any point, right?
You know?
Sometimes Rom's got to hack into the system. And,
we got priorities.
yeah.
Here. And
So in Ops, we cut back to Ops, and Sisko is thanking O'Brien for repairing the replicators. He also tells him to say hi to Keiko for him, and that Jake says that she has been a wonderful teacher so far. Miles replies, but confusingly says that Keiko is flowers about the boy herself, and a confused Sisko asks for clarification, and O'Brien seems to repeat himself, but this time says Keiko's quite fond of the lad herself. The two just sort of brush off this odd moment, and Miles leaves Ops. And you've been struck by foreshadowing.
We cut to the promenade, and a very grumpy looking Kira and a very upbeat looking Dax walk together down the promenade, receiving lots of attention from the various men who pass by. And it's just like polar opposite facial expressions.
This shot is so good. I had to pause and take a screenshot just for my own personal enjoyment. Like, it's such an incredible shot of these two.
Funny. And Dax remarks that she forgot how different it was being a woman after 80 years as Curzon, and that she's quite enjoying all the attention.
Frankly, I too would awooga cartoon eyes pop out if I saw these two
Smack
walking by.
myself on the head with a mallet.
Yeah, I think that's the only reasonable response.
Truly.
I also just, like, I find Jadzia's shameless love of attention to be one of her most endearing and relatable qualities. Like, we all love to be paid attention to, and the way that she sort of is, like, very open about that feels, I don't know, a bit transgressive for the time of, like, it's so taboo for, like, women have to be perfect and attractive and all of this stuff all the time, but at the same time can't ever be seeking out, like, compliments for how good they look or, like, be seen as, like, pick me or whatever. And, like, Jadzia's extremely pick me and has absolutely no shame about that, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
I can also understand how it might, like, not be as attractive to other people, but it's one of the things that I really love about her.
And I liked your note about, like, she's like, oh, I forgot what it is to be a woman. And it's like, Jadzia's been a woman her whole life.
Her whole life. And there was no break in that. Yeah, this is one of those things where they never quite fully figure out how to make, like, the logic of the joined trill make sense, because the Dax symbiote hasn't been a woman for 80 years, but Jadzia is a 28-year-old who has been a woman her entire life and just recently got a slug in her belly. And so, like, the way, what is this, like, joined entity before us, and how does the relationship of the memories of however many lifetimes of Dax interact with the actual like life that Jadzia has led up until this point is very non-specific and
I
like
kind of like that though.
yeah,
Like I like that there's sort of room for interpretation of
yeah.
it, but
I can see that. I think that's like a flaw of mine as a consumer of media, that like I'm always looking for like an explanation of how everything works. And I do try. I feel like as I grow, I have been like more open to like, it's better sometimes when things are left open to interpretation.
Yeah.
I would just like to feel like the open to interpretation-ness of it felt like it added to Dax's character. I feel like I'm often with her trying to place like, what is the context from which you are approaching this situation? Like what I want to understand her better, and I feel like I have a hard time understanding her sometimes as she's written because of the gaps in the lore of like the joint trill and all of that. So I definitely see what you mean about like it's good to have room to interpret, but this is one of those things where it's like you not
You're
only
like,
were
I don't want to interpret. I want
yesterday,
instructions.
yeah. I would like to understand how you're telling me that this is supposed to work, right? If you're making it a plot point in your episode, you should have some sense of how it works. But
I'm just like, it's vibes.
it is vibes. I don't mean to take from the vibes. And of course, the vibe of this moment is God, these two stone cold hotties, like walking down
Knocking
the
out
promenade.
Everyone on the promenade.
It feels like it should be like slow-mo with like 90s music in the background.
I think Kira looking so angry is what makes her hot.
Yeah.
Like, it adds to it.
Them walking down the hall is very the Bayville Sirens episode of X-Men Evolution, where they're like, anyways.
Yeah.
All right. So Kira and Dax pass by a bustling Quarks, where Quark invites them to join his Yay, the Replicators Are Working Again party. Kira quickly says that she's got to get back to work, but that Dax should stay and have fun if she wants. She seems a little unsure for a moment, but then gives Quark a big smile and heads into the bar. What did you make of this moment?
I think it's she likes attention.
Okay.
Yeah, like Quark is so like pathetically like hamina, like, and she likes it.
Yeah, that's a good read. I was just not quite sure what to make of that moment when Kira is like, you can stay if you want, and she seems like very uncomfortable for a second. I just very much like have no idea what that was supposed to be. But then you're right. I think the smile is definitely like, oh well, if I'm gonna be here, with my adoring fans.
Yeah.
I was just curious if you had any more insight to like what that switch was, because it was not super clear to me what they were playing in that moment.
That's as much as I have.
And that's so valid, and I love you for it. I also just love the look on Quark's pathetic face when he convinces Dax to hang out with him. It's like very much the tone of their entire relationship moving forward. And
great.
Armin Shimmerman's just so good, especially under all that makeup.
So we cut to ops where Kira and O'Brien are both working. Kira tries to check in with a clearly exhausted Miles when suddenly his speech becomes indecipherable gibberish, and he seems unable to comprehend anything said to him. He gets extremely flustered, and he rushes out of ops.
Yeah. And I just thought Coleman and Na both do such a great job of playing the urgency of this moment. And I especially like how it feels like O'Brien is really saying things that we can't understand. Like, it feels like the actor actually knows each word that he is trying to say, and it really sells it. And not to be a hater, but that will not be true of everyone in this episode, so it particularly stands out with Colm in that moment.
I feel like it speaks to his theater background.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, I just put like Colomini is an actor, as is Dana. Not to not give her credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
But
no,
the
I
cadence
totally agree.
that he does with the gibberish,
the
is
prep
so
work
good.
is there for sure. So in the infirmary, O'Brien is trying to communicate with Kira and Dr. Bashir. He sort of like writes out on a pad while Julian is examining him, but the writing on the pad is just as jumbled as his speech, unfortunately. And Julian diagnoses the chief as suffering from aphasia, which is a perceptual dysfunction in which oral and visual stimuli are incorrectly processed by the brain. And there's a moment in that where Miles the whole time is like trying to be understood by them, and there's a moment where he just goes, simple hesitation, and it made me laugh out loud. Like, he's just the comedian that you are. Cole Meany is doing so much with everything he's given in this episode, and those are the highlights of An O'Brien Must Suffer episode, which I think was why that part of it really stood out for us at the beginning.
Yeah. And then we're back in We're back in Ops, where
there's a lot of hopping around this episode.
Yeah. Kira and Julian are discussing the situation with Ben and Jadzia. And Julian is explaining that he hasn't been able to find any medical precedent for the chief's predicament, nor any notion to its cause, when suddenly Dax is stricken with the aphasia as well and unable to communicate. Dun, 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 dun! I do feel like Terry knows a bit too quickly here.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's also the writing. Like, Colum had more lines to say to Kira and then realize he's not communicating.
Right.
Whereas, like, Dax goes from normal speech to gibberish, and it's, like, immediately knows.
Yeah, I also felt that way. I, in my head, like, had, like, a little headcanon of, like, okay, Dax is probably the most cerebral of this senior staff, and she also has the most experience having a body because, like, she's had one for 300 years.
True.
And so if you were being very, very generous, you could read it as a sort of like she starts to notice it coming on before it fully hits her in a way that the others don't, because of the way that she is. I mean, she's a scientist. She thinks about things in terms of the scientific method. And she has that moment where before she's fully aphasic, she starts to sort of say, still in English, I'm unable to, and it's like her almost processing that it's starting to happen to her. And so if we're being very, very generous, we could give her that. But yes, I agree with you mostly that it is just kind of a bad acting moment. But
Jamie is generous.
Yes, and on this podcast, we try to be generous to these people and actors that we love. Yes. And I love Terry Farrell so much. And so, you know, I want to find what may have been what we were going for there, even in a moment that you're right, doesn't quite work.
And so we're back in the infirmary, and Bashir discovers that the virus has infected the synapses in both Dax and O'Brien's brains, causing their aphasia-like symptoms.
Yeah, it's a case of some bad brain broccoli, as we see up on his little screen.
We do. We see our little screensaver broccoli.
It's like the virus is represented by this little, like, two-headed broccoli, where it's like Darth Maul's lightsaber with broccoli heads on either end, and that's what the virus looks like. It's very silly looking.
It's very beep boop. Look at our virus.
And there's this little discussion where Ben or Bashir is sort of explaining to Ben, like, and by extension the audience, like, how we're supposed to understand this to work. And so Ben is following along and sort of says back to him, like, okay, so I'd see a tricorder, but I'd say something ridiculous like window, and I just struck me because it's like, whoa, not window. That's crazy, man. Chill out, Hepcat. What?
That would just be so nonsensical.
Right, and it's like, I get what he means, but also that was just a bizarre moment. So just then, Julian's nurse brings in two more Starfleet officers who appear to be similarly affected. And so in response, Ben orders DS9 to be placed into quarantine immediately. And so rough for them, but yay for us that we get more of Mayor Sisko, which we were talking about last week, where, like, at this point, DS9 really is just like this, like, tiny town in the Old West of space.
Frontier medicine, baby.
And Sisko sometimes has to be the local government, and that is always the worst possible position to be in.
The Parks and Rec.
Exactly.
So then we're on the promenade, and Odo arrives at Quark's, where the party continues to rage. Odo asks what he's doing, conducting business as usual, when all businesses on the station are supposed to be closed. But Quark argues that his establishment qualifies as essential. Yeah.
This entire conversation is so COVID-19 coded, it just makes me want to throw up a little.
I really like every episode of a show now where it involves a quarantine or an epidemic. I'm just like, whoo!
But this moment also, I mean, like, yes, 100%, but this moment felt so specific where it's like, it's not just a quarantine. It's not just like a out of control virus. Like, we're very specifically having the conversation about like essential workers. Like and like grifters trying to pretend to be essential workers to get out of like reasonable government regulations. Like, I had like, a note. I do think Quark would unfortunately have applied for a PPP loan and then used it to make anti-mask t-shirts. That feels like really the vibe.
It absolutely is.
And so the alien from earlier is still at the bar, and he interrupts to compliment Quark on the food. And Quark sort of sheepishly explains to Odo, Rom was able to fix the replicator. So, yeah. And Odo, detective that he is, ain't buying it.
Yes.
And,
very fortunate.
Yeah. Odo has that line where he goes, yes, very fortunate. And frankly, everything after this point is Quark's fault because he knows that's the noir trope vocal cadence that Odo uses when he's suspicious. Like,
man is sus.
You really should have known at that point. You weren't paying enough attention to your husband if you didn't catch that.
And then we join Jake Sisko on the eerily empty promenade. And they got some greenery. Yeah. I don't know if you saw, but there's some ivy on one of the things.
In the replimat, yeah.
Keiko's doing.
I think that was the greenery that was there at the beginning because remember we talked about how it looked kind of like my apartment.
Oh, there was a little bit.
Yeah. It's in the like replimat.
I was ready to give Keiko
but I love that you're excited about that.
I just want her to have a good time.
And maybe she did. Maybe she put it there and we missed that. I don't know. But Jake standing up at the upper level, just looking out at the wholly empty promenade, really took me back to the last time that I watched this episode, which was in 2020. And I was like, I need to watch my favorite show to feel better about the world. And then this rolled around and I was like, why God? But like it was like that moment when all of the roads were still almost empty every day, and like it really just felt like we were living through an episode of The Twilight Zone.
Yep.
And this moment with Jake really captures the unrealness of that in a way that I thought was really cool. Like we're just so used to that promenade set being so bustling with all these different kinds of people, and it's eerie to have it completely silent. So then Benjamin arrives and he is telling Jake that he expected him home an hour ago and orders him to return to their quarters. He gets interrupted and confronted by the impatient freighter captain Jahil, who officially requests permission to leave DS9 before his cargo's ruined. Sisko reiterates that no one is exempt from the quarantine and sends Jahil back to his ship. It feels like Jahil now represents something very specific and political in a post-COVID world that he didn't when this episode first aired in 1993. And it's interesting to me the way that a whole plot and a character like that can change, like the way that it lands with the audience can change when the context around it shifts like that. I think that he was probably meant to come off much more sympathetic than I think he does now, because there's a lot he's really playing the desperation. He's really playing the, like, you feel for him. He's going to lose out on this entire shipment if he's not allowed to leave. And, like, he just stopped off here to get his antimatter, whatever fixed. And now he's caught up in a Starfleet plot, which sucks for anybody who doesn't willingly
It's
sign
terrible
up to be in a
when you're not the
plot.
main character, yeah.
But in a post-COVID, and obviously I say post-COVID to mean like a world where COVID has happened, not that COVID is over, because it's still very much going on.
Thank you for adding that. I was like, it's not over.
Exactly. No, post-COVID has happened, and now we are living in that world. I think it's much harder to read him as sympathetic in any way because it's just so clear that, like, Ben is doing, I would say, the minimum of what he needs to do to keep people safe in these circumstances. And this guy just reads as, I mean, it's very easy to project on, like, any of the archetypes of just, like, selfishness and weird social Darwinism that has pervaded, like, our world since the COVID pandemic took off onto this guy. And so I'm just like, he can get fucked for all
I don't care, buddy.
Like, yeah. Sorry, Mr. Small Businessman, but
So then we cut to Quark pushing a catering cart through the corridors of the habitat ring. He uses a small device to gain access to one of the empty sets of crew quarters and sets to work replicating his entire menu from the kitchen replicator.
Why would you make the drinks individually instead of like in pitchers, you idiot?
He's good at crime. He's not good at logistics.
I have yet to ever see him be good at a crime, so let's circle back to that.
Well, he did steal those isolinear rods.
He has them.
Well,
we don't know what.
Maybe he's not good at crime. He's just good at the black market, which arguably is good at a specific type of crime.
A kind of crime. Yeah. But
anyway.
He goes up to the replicator to order and starts with one Ferengi something or other extra strong, and it's literally like a glass of a drink.
And he's going to fill up this whole cart with individual drinks.
It feels like very like, ooh, orange businessman, smart. And, okay, so there's another thing here that we have to discuss. This episode raises some very important questions about everyone's favorite topic in speculative fiction, economics! Namely, if the replicators in individual quarters have the same capacities as the replicators in Quark's or any of the other restaurants on the station, why do people ever buy food from these restaurants?
Well, I mean, think about it. You don't necessarily go to a restaurant just for the food. You go because it's community, it's company, it's
food, water, atmosphere.
To do, with people. Like, we can drink coffee in my apartment all the time, but going out and like having a little coffee.
Okay,
nice.
I was like gonna throw out like potential like economic explanations, but I actually really like you taking it to a place of culture, because that feels like it really speaks to the way that the Federation is sort of characterized, where like we know, for instance, like even outside of Starfleet, people still for the most part have jobs in this like post-scarcity society. Like most people have like a career or an occupation that they go and do every day. They're not receiving a salary for it because that's not how the economic system of the Federation works.
Right.
They are doing it because they perceive there to be a service that needs to be provided, and they see themselves as equipped and capable of providing that. And also, I think recognizing that like getting out and like interacting with people and doing a job is like good for us. And,
it is.
You know, and so I love to consider that idea that like, people go to a restaurant because it's like good for them and good for community.
It's
and
good
like,
to be with other people.
And even in a situation where they might have to pay for that, which I think in future episodes we'll get into, like, how does anyone pay for anything when it's supposed to be a post-scarcity situation? But like, I have to remember, it's not just Federation on the station, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, the fact that they would be willing to pay for an experience, that feels so like, not totally alien, because obviously we pay for experiences today, but like, I don't think people would go to a restaurant just for the experience of going to a restaurant and pay for it if you could get restaurant quality food at home anytime you want. But there is in the future this different sense of like what is quote unquote worth your time, because they're not living under the thumb of capitalism.
Yeah. And I was actually just reading an article in The Atlantic about like the isolationist sort of trend of, well, I don't have to go out to a restaurant to get food. I can have it delivered to my home.
Right.
And it is something that as humans, and obviously not everyone on Deep Space Nine is a human, but we're all humans and the show is made by humans. It's pretend. As humans, we need to interact with other humans, like on a psychological, mental health level.
Yeah.
And so I think that is something that post World War III, nuclear, etc., Federation humanity would realize and recognize. I also feel like, I don't know if we get into this specifically, but I imagine Starfleet folks who are posted not on Earth or on a ship have to get some sort of salary so they can pay for things while they operate in a not post-scarcity place like Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, that so like I said, we will get into this because there will be episodes where it's more relevant, but that is always what I have figured. We're not going to get anything really spoilers. We're never really going to get anything explicit about that, but I don't know if it would be a salary so much as that I always saw it as like more of a stipend kind of thing, where it's like,
A little walking around money.
Yeah, because you don't need it. You can get your meals out of replicators. And like even to note, I feel like it's important to note, theoretically all Federation worlds are post-scarcity. It's not Earth. It's not just Earth, right? And so these are for people that are stationed on non-Federation worlds or on a space station like this where it shares space with like a civilian population. I think more than from a like you need to eat perspective, I think there's probably a you should be out like interacting with people and like integrating with like the local culture and all of that. So I always assumed that there was a like Starfleet officers get some sort of stipend to spend at Quark's and to spend at whatever, because we do see later that like they are paying Quark money for services rendered at the bar. So yeah, I think that's really interesting what you posited there. And I think that is more interesting than what I was going to get into, which just the best explanation that I could think of is that maybe the replicators are only in quarters for station personnel, like Starfleet officers and the Bajoran militia, and that civilians would need to eat at the Replimat or one of the restaurants, and that this would track with Bajor itself not being explicitly post-scarcity. It makes sense that they would provide food and access to replicators for other things for their troops on board, but maybe not for the entire station population where there's people coming and going all the time.
Right. It could be a combination of all of these things. That's the fun of Trek. We can dig in and interpret, as we were talking about earlier, or we can be like, it's a vibe. Don't worry about it.
And so we're going to be doing a lot of that sort of like interpreting moving forward, but it is important to note that I think it's very deliberate that how the Federation economy works is something that we never really get too deeply into on screen in these shows. And I think there's two different ways to, well, there's probably hundreds of different ways to look at it, but I would say there's two primary ways to look at that. On one end is, okay, we don't really know all of the details of how that could work, so it's easier for us to just leave it open-ended. That makes it more believable. And then on the other end, you sort of have the like, oh, we don't want to be shown as like portraying a politic that radical on network television, so we'd rather just not get into what that actually looks like, right? Anyways.
But unfortunately for Quark, the catering cart is actually Odo! Go, Gadget, go!
And Quark just has this great line, I thought the front wheels were sticking a bit, which I thought was so good. He's just like, should have known.
And also, Odo is like, you could have just asked to use the replicators.
Oh,
and it's like,
could he? Like, that feels like a very important add-on to the economic discussion of, like, would you have allowed him to replicate all this food for free and then sell it for a profit? Not that I think replicating it for free would have been a problem, because everything, like, from the Federation angle is free and they're just concerned about people getting the things that they need. But the idea that then it would be hoarded and then sold for a profit, I mean, to bring it back to where we started, it's very toilet paper.
It is
during
extremely
COVID-19.
2020. Odo would maybe let someone else do that. Never Quark.
Right. And Quark asks Odo about how he found him out, and Odo explains to him that it was his claim that Rom fixed the replicators at the bar, which tipped him off because Rom's an idiot. He couldn't fix a straw if it was bent. And it's a very funny line. We'll come back to the implications of it during our spoiler segment, because it is a little loaded.
So we return to Ops, and Julian tells Kira and Ben that he's determined that the virus is somehow being absorbed through ingestion. And Kira protests that all the food on the station is replicated. Oh, okay. All the food on the station is replicated?
Yeah. So I had a note about that for Econ Corner, which
we got to continue the economics
I
discussion.
definitely remember at some point in my life when I was obsessively thinking about and trying to rationalize the economics of Deep Space Nine, as I do, thinking, well, what if people pay for food at like the Klingon restaurant on the, or whatever because it's fresh food, not replicated, and that has a perceived value in deep space where almost all food is replicated. And I feel like that was a really good theory, but this definitely pokes a hole in that, where it's like, no, all the restaurants are replicating their food.
Well, what if they replicate the ingredients? Like, they replicate, like, noodles and the protein
and then they
and
make
the whatever,
it.
and then they make it. So the act of making happens. Because I feel like Bones has lines about, like, replicated food will never be like the real thing.
Well, replicators don't exist yet in TOS is the thing. They have just those like food slots that like food just comes out of. And
I just assumed those were replicators.
They call them food slots, or I think on Enterprise it's like protein resequencing or something.
Interesting. Okay.
And so yeah, it's like a precursor to replicator technology, I think, where the idea is that they are making food out of like probably like protein pastes or like something like that, but that it's not fully just like we're turning energy into matter. Like we're not quite at that point yet.
Okay. TOS is very hand wavy about that stuff.
Well, yeah,
so
none of that is consistent. So
not a lot of TOS is, but that's okay. We love them anyway.
We sure do.
But again, moving on from Econ Corner, like we said, Kira protests that all the food in the station is replicated and that all the replicators employ biofilters. But Julian says he's tested samples from all of the replicators all over the station, and the ones on command level are for sure contaminated.
Yeah. So Ben sends Kira to inspect the site where O'Brien first repaired the command level replicators, and in the meantime, he orders Julian to have all of the command level replicators shut down. Julian unfortunately explains that that's not going to be enough, as he's gotten aphasic patients from all over the station. And Ben wonders aloud how that could possibly be, given what they have learned.
What could it be?
Enter Odo, who explains what he learned about Quark breaking into the crew quarters to replicate his entire menu, and explaining how the virus escaped the confines of just the command level crew. Julian worries that with such a large portion of the populace infected, the virus has the potential to become airborne.
And sure enough, a scan of the station's airflow determines that the virus has mutated into an airborne pathogen. Also, like... He's like, I just took an air sample. I'm like, girl, that was like less than a second. The computer didn't need a minute.
I think the computer just has like a slot, like a little, like a straw that comes out. And
air
like,
sample.
Yeah, just takes the air. I just took a DNA test. Turns out I'm 100% broccoli.
And the virus is literally green now, too. So it's just full-on broccoli virus.
It's just becoming more and more broccoli with each passing crisis. And so Ben, coming back from a commercial, because that's like our like dun 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 moment, does a log.
Broccoli in the air.
And the air is full of broccoli.
Cloudy with a chance of broccoli.
Jesus fucking Christ. We learn that 60% of the station is now symptomatic. And so we cut to Kira digging around with her tricorder inside of the command level replicator that Miles repaired. And in here, she discovers the hidden device that Miles inadvertently set off. And I just love Kira getting her hands dirty, doing some scanning, crawling around in the neon tunnel.
We love it. We love to see it. And the device that caused the replicators to materialize the virus at the molecular level within the food they produced. So Kira, of course, insists the Cardassians must be responsible. I really love that Kira always jumps to Cardassians. It reminds me of like the dad in the Fairly Odd Parents who's like, Dinkelberg. Oh my God. It's just Kira, Cardassian.
Dinkelberg.
And here's where I'd put a non-colonized Bayshore if I had one.
I also just love the slightest hint of like friendly argument between Ben and Kira about whether the device is Cardassian. You can sort of tell how much they are coming to appreciate each other. Ben reminds Kira to be patient and thorough, and Kira reminds Ben to never ever trust the lizard fascists or forget that they are all living in former lizard fascist headquarters.
It is lizard fascist HQ.
Important
Redux.
to keep in mind at all times. And Dr. Bashir calls Ben down to the infirmary, where he discovers little Jake has become symptomatic and is now wasting away like a Victorian orphan.
Not baby Jake.
It's really really overplayed here, but it kind of works. The shift, especially from the cool, collected Commander Sisko to the worried dad Benjamin, is a really excellent beat.
Yeah, and like the way his face crumples and he pulls Jake into him, like it's he loves him so much. It's very sweet.
This relationship is very much intended to be the emotional center of this episode, and while I don't think it really is, these moments at least pay lip service to that in a way that I appreciate.
So Ben goes to take Jake to the makeshift hospital wing that Bashir set up. And on the way out, Julian tells him that when he has a moment, he has something to show him.
Yep. And so in the hospital wing, Ben finds Quark attempting desperately to communicate with a few of the patients in order to settle their tabs. And Armin Shimmerman just has this incredible delivery talking to this guy on his hospital bed. He goes, "You gold! Oh, me!" And I lost my mind at that. Armin Shimmerman's just such a good comedian, and he does so much to lighten the tone of these episodes, especially when things get dark like this. And I'm just so glad we have him.
He's great comic relief. And I love the exchange of like, he's saying, I want to make sure none of these people are pretending to get out from paying. And Ben's like, no one could be that devious. I am.
Yeah, it's always like, no. Have you met me?
This is something I would do, yeah.
I always have to assume that people are up to the worst possible shit because I am always up to the worst possible shit.
Everyone is as terrible as I am.
And so Ben sets up a terrified Jake in a hospital bed close to Miles and Dax, and after sharing a silent moment with his son, he heads off to meet with Julian. In the infirmary, Julian explains to Ben that the virus is synthetic and that identifying a key protein structure within the virus helped him to determine that it was created by the Bajorans, likely as a terrorist plot against the Cardassians from when the station was still Terok Nor. And not gonna lie, I feel like Julian is having a little bit too much fun with this one. Like, all right, frontier medicine boy, I get why this is a little exciting to you, but like lives are at risk. Come on now.
And Ben is like, cut to the chase, cut to the chase.
Because he just wants to explain all his science that he did.
He just gets really excited about science.
Which, I get when I do a job at work that ends up being more complicated than I expect it to be. I do then expect when I report back in, like, you're going to sit there and listen to everything that I had to go through to get this done, because I need you to understand what a process it was for me. And that you should be very proud of me.
And we are. So later, Ben is meeting with Kieran and Odo in his office, and he learns that the device itself dates back to the construction of the station, which was 18 years ago. So presumably it was made and placed aboard the station by the Bajoran resistance, but the operatives were captured or killed before they ever got to activate it. Yeah. So Ben tasks Kira with talking to her terrorist friends to try and find out who could have created the virus.
Yeah. And the look on Kira's face here is excellent, where you could tell she's just like, do you think everyone in the Bajoran Underground knows each other? And like, Kira, babes, it's not his fault. You do know everyone in the Bajoran Underground.
It's not that everyone knows each other. It's that everyone knows Kira. Yeah. Like the L word web that, Alice creates in the first season. Kira like
has
the
kissed
center.
Every lesbian in the Bajoran
every
Underground.
Single one.
And by extension knows every weapons manufacturer in the Bajoran Underground.
I also love Odo's moment where he's like, obviously this happened before I took over station security.
Oh, the sneaking of the device in? Yeah.
He's like, I'm like, calm down, babe. No one's mad at you.
No one's mad. No
it's
one's
fine.
saying, but it's a point of pride for him.
It is. He's like, this one wasn't on me.
And Ben has a line here, too, where he says, we just have to hope they remember the antidote, thinking about who Kira's going to track down. Mm-hmm. And Odo replies, that's assuming they ever bothered to create one. And it's just a great little exchange to highlight the characters' differing perspectives and give us some context on how they are going to engage with this crisis, right? Because even with his son infected, part of Cisco is responding to this still like a Starfleet officer would to any other wacky space situation, which is just stay calm and we'll figure it out. There's always a solution. And Kira and Odo are like, sir, this is a terrorist bioweapon we accidentally set off. Why would they have created a way to undo it? I just love how genuinely surprised Ben seems by that. Like, it really highlights how Starfleet he is, that it's like, they wouldn't have created an antidote. And it's like, yeah, well, why would they?
Why would they? They're trying to kill Cardassians.
And so it's just a great little moment of characterization.
So Kira places a Zoom call to Bajor to a woman from the Bajoran resistance, probably a lesbian, who gives her the name Decon Elig. And last she heard, Elog was being held at the Velos 7 Cardassian internment camp, but that was 9 years ago.
And she has a line where she says, I'm sorry, Kira, but it was all so long ago. And I love on Star Trek when we start talking like an old-timey movie. It's like, yeah, it's a little cheesy, but I do think it genuinely helps disconnect the show from the moment in time that it was filmed and feel more nebulous in its setting. And it's just fun.
I do have to say now 19 years ago, I'm like, that is a long time ago.
100%. Yeah.
Like, when I was 16, I probably didn't think that. Now I'm like, no, yeah, that's a long time ago.
I could not cure a virus that I created when I was 16. That's not going to happen. And so in the hospital wing, frantic Jake gets the attention of the nurse on duty and brings her to check on Miles, who's now unconscious. And I do just have to say, sorry, but this nurse is so bad at her job. Like, lady, you know, one, that he can only speak gibberish, but two, he seems pretty upset and is clearly pointing to where he wants you to go. Like, do they not cover using context clues at the Bajoran Medical Academy?
Context clues 101.
Like, he's saying to her, like, what? What are you trying to say? And it's like, he has the gibberish disease, ma'am.
Explain yourself better while you have this gibberish disease. I don't understand. Yeah, that's the whole problem, babe.
Yeah, you have hit the nail on the head there.
So she finally gets it. She checks O'Brien and sees that he is running a high fever and places a call to Julian. And Julian tells Cisco that the virus has attacked O'Brien's autonomic nervous system and that Miles will be dead in 12 hours. Yeah. Save him. That's
not the last time that Miles will be dead in 12 hours.
Oh God, no.
And this is a moment that stood out to me because as much as I like this episode, I think it's almost a shame that it comes so early in the run of DS9 because I think we do miss out on how this story could have been heightened by the character relationships being stronger. Julian and Miles in particular is what I thought of, because without getting into like spoilery details, I would say that those characters have a really interesting arc and a really interesting relationship that develops. And it feels like this episode, coming as early as it does in the run, really lets everything sort of hinge on the relationships that predate the show. So you have Odo and Quark and Ben and Jake. And those are sort of the like driving emotional, like relational stakes of this episode.
Because we haven't established
Exactly. And so while those work, I would say I think the Quark and Odo stuff works better than the Ben and Jake stuff in this episode. But while that does work, I just can't help but think about how cool and interesting this episode could have been if it were a season 2 or 3 episode where these people feel like family to one another, or at least coworkers with like messier, complicated relationships, right?
Yeah.
So just something I wanted to note.
Yeah. So Kira continues to search for a lead on Recon Elig. Cardassian records unfortunately show that Elig was killed while attempting to escape from prison.
Yeah.
So she checks the signatory on Elig's death certificate and gets the name of a Bajoran medical assistant, Surmak Wren. Pulling up his file, Kira learns that he survived the prison and returned home to Bajor when it closed down. Nana is so great. Her facial expressions throughout this scene, throughout this whole episode, like, she's just phenomenal.
I would pay good money to watch Nana visit or read the phone book. Like,
so many American dollars.
Yeah.
So many.
And so in an empty Quark's bar, Quark spins the Dabo wheel by himself.
Forlorn.
Pretty sad. Odo comes in, and when a groveling Quark tries to convince him to take a spin at the wheel, Odo somewhat sheepishly admits that he never learned the rules to the game, which is a cute beat. And I just had, oh, look, it's Odo's regularly scheduled time to go bother Quark.
He's so embarrassed that he doesn't know the rules. It's so cute. He's like more embarrassed about this than being a virgin when he talked about that.
Yeah, he is. Well, because it's about like observational skills, right? And he didn't pick it up.
True.
And so Quark says he'd be more than happy to teach Odo, but Odo says he's needed in ops and that he just came to warn Quark that he will be personally held responsible for any property that goes missing during the quarantine. And I think bullying Quark is a coping skill for Odo when he's stressed. It just like lowers his goo pressure generally.
Yep.
And that's why he's always popping up there in the middle of crises where he probably should be doing something else.
And in the infirmary, we're back there. An exhausted Julian is running simulations on the computer when suddenly his verbal instructions stop making sense and he is forced to give up his research.
Dang. And that's every actor gets a moment where they sort of realize that they've contracted the disease, and they're all pretty good beats. It's a good showing for our Deep Space Nine cast.
Yeah.
So Kira finally uses the computer to locate Dr. Cermak Wren, who's currently serving as the chief administrator of the Ilvian Medical Complex on Bajor. Kira hails the complex from the station and tries to ask Cermak whether he helped Deacon Elig create the aphasia virus, but he tells her he has no idea what she's talking about and hangs up on him.
Yep.
And I one note that I had for this is when she's explaining to him who she is, she's like, I'm the Bajoran liaison on Deep Space Nine, blah, blah, blah. And he says, yes, the old Cardassian mining station. And I just think it's interesting that DS9 doesn't really have its own reputation yet, even after everything with the wormhole. It's still very early days in terms of establishing the new status quo for the Bajoran system. Even though we've established very much the status quo on the station, there's a lot that will still change over the course of this season.
That's a great observation. I also just love the idea of calling someone up and being like, hey, remember that bioweapon you created when you were a terrorist?
And then she's like, why is he so annoyed that I'm... Like, she doesn't get it. Which, I mean, makes sense because she's constantly in the middle of her, workplace talking about her former terrorist antics. So
I actually want to get into that in a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, great. So Kira runs to Ops to tell Sisko that she thinks she may have found one of the scientists responsible for the virus. And before Kira runs in, Odo and Ben are having this talk where Odo says to him, look, I'm a security officer and a damn good one, but that doesn't make me qualified to help you run station operations. If you missed last episode, I can't do an Odo voice, so this is my Odo voice. And this is such a small moment, but I don't know. It's just one I really love because Odo goes out of his way to seem so aloof and above it all when he's in his comfort zone. That's how he wants to be perceived. But as soon as he's outside of his comfort zone, we see that he's actually a very anxious person. And even more so, he's very sensitive about his own perceived shortcomings in a very sort of adolescent way. He doesn't want to set the expectation that he knows how to do something that he doesn't, and then have people be disappointed in him. And so we see that come out in these moments where, it comes down to him to do things outside of his normal job description. We really see a change in demeanor for that character. And I think that's just an awesome little bit of characterization, both writing-wise and Rene Auberjonois' acting, which is always superlative.
He's just a little scared goo boy.
He's just a little scared goo boy. He doesn't want to let down his friends. And so Sisko agrees to allow Kira to pilot a runabout to Bajor to confront the uncooperative Cermak Wren after she assures Sisko that she won't set foot on the planet. And I really love also how, with some encouragement from Odo, Ben... We have a Ren and a Ben, so this is going to... Ben lets Kira go without asking any more questions about how she's going to do what she's going to do. Right now, he's trusting her because he has to, but it's an important step in building a more lasting trust between these two characters, and I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a good moment. So he heads to the hospital wing, Ben, and he pays Jake a visit. All around them, patients are becoming sicker and sicker. Ben gives Jake a big hug and tells him that he has to believe things will get better because he is not going to lose him.
It's a very cute moment between the Sisko boys.
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised we didn't get something like this earlier in the episode, but it's good that we have it now.
It is. And I really love that Ben accompanies it with the physical affection because he knows Jake can't understand him, unlike the nurse. And so he makes sure the tone of his voice and the physical affection, the message gets across.
Speaking of that, I did read something about the fact that Avery Brooks, who plays Ben, really appreciated this episode for the specific reason of the physical affection that gets to be portrayed between Ben and his son. That it's something that felt sort of transgressive in a way because, that kind of loving physical contact between men can be so taboo, especially fathers and sons. And the bit that I read about it was just Avery sort of saying I hug my sons, I kiss my son. It's very much a part of our relationship. And it was very meaningful to be able to portray that in... Actually, he said kids. I don't know if he has sons, but yeah.
His children.
And he also was just talking about how, the first time he met Cirroc Lofton, he gave him a big hug and he gives him a big hug every time he sees him, and like that's a very important thing for him to be able to portray. So I love that you locked onto that, and that felt meaningful to you as a viewer.
Yes, absolutely. And that's something I have always really appreciated about the Sisko's relationship, is that it's a very physically affectionate relationship. And yeah, we don't see that between men. We don't see that between father and sons, you know, a lot in media.
Yeah, and it's so important, especially in a family unit that's just two people, right? They are all each other has. All right, so back in ops, Odo
Love
reports.
will save the world. Love will save the world.
Love will save the world.
Sorry.
No,
not to interrupt. I was just like, wait, this is what it's about.
Restate your thesis. Defend your thesis.
In this essay.
Back in ops, Odo reports to Sisko that there's activity registering on the sensors on docking port 5, and it seems like a ship may be attempting to depart. Sisko notes that Jahiel's ship was docked at port 5, and he orders Odo to hail the freighter captain. And I love the way that Rene Auberjonois as Odo looks at this freaking sensor readout. Like, he's not quite sure he's reading it correctly. Like, he's inexperienced with these systems. Like, this is all new to him. It's so far from the main action of this movement, from this moment, which is really focused on like the Jahiel nonsense. But those small details help it all feel so much more real. And just, God, I love actors.
Fucking love actors. So Ben tells Jahiel he's not cleared to leave the station and they won't release the docking clamps for him. Jahiel powers up his thrusters anyways, and his ship begins straining against the docking clamps.
Fucking bitch.
Ben orders him to cut his engines and stand down. Jahiel says, absolutely not. I'm going to leave before I become sick like the rest of my crew.
So Sisko admits to Odo that they will have to retract the docking clamps or else Jahiel's ship could damage itself and the station trying to pull away. But they plan to grab him in a tractor beam as soon as he's cleared the docking ring. Unfortunately, Jahiel's engines put too much stress on the clamps and Odo isn't able to retract them from ops.
I just want to point out that Ben's point is so good. Like, why would you leave by yourself? Your whole crew is sick. So you're going to go into space. Where you know
The
you're
vastness
carrying
of
a
space.
virus, the vast, uncaring blackness of space. And this virus will most likely make you incapable of doing anything and probably die soon.
You're not going to be able to read your computers. You're
not going to be able to navigate. You're not going to be able to fly your goddamn ship. Like, why would... At this point, why?
It's another moment that feels like very relevant to our own recent experiences with a pandemic where it's just like fear eats logic for dinner, you know?
Yeah,
where it's like he's just like, this is where the panini is. I'm going to get as far from here as possible. And it doesn't track. It's not logical. You're going to go get the people that you're selling this food to sick.
Yeah.
You know? But it's just not, the math's not mathing for tired Paul Giamatti.
So true.
So then we cut to Kira aboard a runabout approaching Bajor, and she gives a little scan of the Ilvian medical complex from orbit to determine that there's only one occupant in the office, the administrator's office, and then she locks on and beams Dr. Cermak Wren aboard. And he demands to be returned to his office immediately, but Kira brushes him off and sets course for Deep Space Nine.
This whole scene is just gold.
This is maybe one of the best like little scenes I've ever watched in the history of television. Her little lean over to the view screen as she Zoom calls Cermak and just, oh, hello again, doctor. Just checking to see you in your office. It's the cuntiest moment in the history of the franchise to date. It's so fucking good. I love Kira Nerys so much. And then the look when she hits the button to beam him up. Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, fuck yeah.
Get his ass.
Get his ass.
Oh, so good. And then she's so annoyed that he has the audacity to be upset that she kidnapped him. It's like, other people would pay good money for this.
Oh,
and like,
would.
I am one of them. We would be first in line.
I volunteer as tribute.
Also, later in the series, they will establish that the station is like a 3-hour flight from Bajor. And that just doesn't seem to be the case here. Or the virus is moving much more slowly than the pace of the episode would indicate. One or the other.
I mean, different systems, different physiological, I don't know.
Don't
worry about it. Back at the station, Sisko and Odo attempt to reestablish contact with Jahiel, but his comms are down. Sisko puts out a station-wide call for anyone who can still understand him to come to ops and help. And it's a big, like, is anyone on board a pilot? Like, literally anyone who can speak, please come up here.
I like how we're continuing Odo's sort of like, I'm really trying to keep it get together here, guys, but it's just me. Like, it's just goo in the cockpit.
All we got is goo.
And what we need is Julie Andrews in the cockpit.
Odo should have sang The King and I.
Getting to know you. Getting to know all about you.
I thought maybe Odo should have sang. But he suggests that they blow the mooring clamps, that the blast should push Jahil's ship away from the docking ring before it explodes. Sisko agrees, but moments later succumbs to aphasia.
Yeah.
And oh god. So he starts speaking gibberish, and Odo says, "Oh, I see." And it's just like, Renee
I
over.
see.
Oh,
it's such a good moment
it's
from
heartbreaking.
him.
It's so good.
Where it's like it's very sad, but it's also very like he's in emergency mode, and so to some extent it's like, all right, one less person to rely on, right?
Okay.
Like it's all on the who's got two thumbs, is made of goo, and is entirely responsible for the safety of this station. This guy. And we cut back to the runabout. Dr. Cermak is being extremely defensive with Kira about his involvement in the underground and creating the virus, and Kira finally snaps that she is not interested in assigning blame, just finding a cure to the virus. And this line and line delivery make for one of the best and most thematically resonant moments in the whole episode, I think. There are lots and lots of people who are to varying degrees to blame for this situation, right? Miles for accidentally setting off the device in the first place, Quark for spreading the virus through half the station with his replicator shenanigans, the Bajoran Underground for creating and planting the virus and for never creating an antidote, the Cardassians for occupying Bajor in the first place, and placing blame on any of them does nothing to help prevent the current crisis, right? I love how we don't see anyone on the station really looking to place blame, and it's an outsider to the problem that is the first one who is raising that specter and who is really consumed and concerned with who is getting the blame here.
Yeah.
And then I love how his fear of being blamed very easily could have resulted in the deaths of everyone on the station if Kira hadn't kidnapped him, right? It's a very good object lesson in the way that, like, the fear of accountability always causes more problems. And finally, I just love so much Kira's righteous indignation at how out of whack his priorities are. Like, blame, I am literally trying to save lives, you old bitch. Like, you're coming with me to the fucking station. I think it's such a strong moment, and I think in any I just think that there's this tension that always needs mining and investigating between accountability and blame, because like accountability is obviously something that's so important for justice and peace and all of that, and blame is something that is so useless most of the time, and those are things that can look really similar on the surface. And how can we really dig into like where are the meaningful differences? And I think at the end of the day, like, blame doesn't serve anyone, right? And this episode helps to illustrate that. And at the end of the day, even though he doesn't want to, and even though Kira forces him into it, Cermak does take accountability by helping them cure the virus. It's not about words, it's about actions, right?
I love that. I think that's such a great point to illustrate.
Thank you.
The thing that stood out with me about the blame, I thought, is interesting in terms of the dynamics of the Bajoran Underground and Bajor now post like colonization. Yeah. So Kira definitely feels pride in her work.
Like in her service with the Underground.
Her service as a terrorist.
Yeah. Thank you for your service.
Like, there are complicated feelings there for her, for sure, no question. But generally, I would say it's something she is proud to have been a part of.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
And the doctor is so quick to be like, I was not involved. I was only in the ground for 6 months before I got arrested. And that, like, I wasn't even really involved. This isn't even really my fault. And the fact that the first thing he goes to is someone's going to blame me for this. Like, when she first calls him, she doesn't say the virus got out and everyone's dying.
Yeah.
She literally just mentions its existence. And he's like, nope.
Yep.
And I just thought that was really interesting, and especially given in past prologue where we have, you know, there are parts of the Bajoran underground, of the resistance, that are by the Bajoran government designated like not okay. And so I thought that was really interesting in terms of like, you know, you would think like, hey, everyone who fought in the resistance, like, yay, now that we've thrown off the oppressive yoke,
would be heroes.
Yeah. And clearly the Doctor does not think that's what he's going to get.
Right. And it raises such an interesting question about why he thinks that, right? Is that because that is an accurate assessment of a post-occupations Bajor's relationship with its freedom fighters? Like, is there a discomfort with the messy things that those people had to do during the occupation? Or is it something more internal for himself where he feels guilt about the things that he was involved in and sort of has a perception that if people knew
he was part of that
they would be to blame? And part of that, you know, it's always tricky because we don't know as much about Bajoran culture as we would love to, but this man's a doctor, right? And so if we're to project if there's anything similar in their culture as in ours around like the idea of do no harm, the Hippocratic Oath, all of that, does he maybe feel some kind of way about how that would affect his reputation as a doctor that he was involved in developing bioweapons,
yeah.
Hard to know, but really important questions to ask, and I love that you raised that.
So the doctor, Dr. Cermak, says, unfortunately, he doesn't know if Deacon even created a cure. For all he knows, one doesn't exist. And Kira tells him that she is infected with the virus, and that means now he has been exposed as well. So anything he knows about Deacon's work had better be put to use right goddamn now.
And she's got the great line where she says, I've been infected with your virus, doctor, and now you've been infected too. And it's just such a killer moment where she gets all up in his face to sort of highlight physically highlight the transmission of the virus from her to him, and he sort of tries to like turn his face away
it's
as
so
though
good.
to limit the exposure, but it's just too late, buddy. Like, but it's a
sailed.
great physical exchange between them that speaks to like there isn't any logic behind those physical moments, but it speaks to the illogic of how we respond to human emotion, right? Where like it makes so much sense as just an immediate physical response, and I love that they play it that way.
Yeah. So Odo broadcasts a call for help throughout the entire station, and who arrives but one Quark, one of the few people unaffected.
It's so good. It's such a great excuse to pair these two together.
Oh, we love it. We love the odd couple. I also just the way Quark fucking saunters in, the way that Odo has been like sauntering into the bar all episode. It's like, well.
Oh, that's such a great point of how that mirrors that. I never thought, but you're absolutely right.
Do I detect a note to panic? Like, Quark is loving every fucking second of this.
And as good as all of the odd couple moments between these characters are, it's always at its best when they are forced into an odd couple situation during an actual crisis.
Oh, yeah.
One of my favorite DS9 beats,
so
always.
Good. So Quark smugly advises Odo that they can discuss his compensation later. And he beams Odo directly to the docking ring to manually blow the clamps.
Yep. And so we get back on the runabout. Kira is approaching the station and is, going through all of the docking procedures, including like radioing to be like, hey, can I have permission to land, blah, blah, blah. And Kira is stunned to find Quark answering her hail as the runabout returns to the station. And after boarding and bringing Dr. Cermak to the infirmary, unfortunately, Kira becomes the virus's latest unintelligible victim. And Kira's face when she realizes that she's done all she can do, it's just, this is a bitch that hates to be taken out of a fight. And it's such a good moment.
She and O'Brien are like incapable of taking a moment off.
Yeah, and I love that they like recognize that in each other, and that's a foundation, I think, of their relationship.
Yeah.
So from the docking ring, Odo manages to board Jahil's ship and rescue him from the fire on board just in time, carrying him aboard the station as he babbles incoherently. So we see now that Jahil was infected and was on his way out to spread it around the galaxy.
To die.
And it just struck me as kind of wild that they took the time to save this guy before blowing the docking clamps. Like, I really would have thought that this was going to be a needs of the many type situation. And It's fine because I love when my heroes are more heroic than I am. So like that, I genuinely in Star Trek, I love like when I make an assumption about what would need to be sacrificed for the greater good here, and then they prove me wrong by showing that you can still be heroic in like a difficult moment, right? Like that's what I love about this shit.
That's Star Trek, baby.
Yeah, like did tired Paul Giamatti deserve that? Absolutely not. And yet still
he got it.
He got it.
I also just love him babbling in gibberish, and I was like, "Yeah, tell me about it." Like, it's so such a good little like I'm coping through sarcasm.
And so back in the infirmary, reviewing Dr. Bashir's research on the virus, Dr. Cermak tells anaphasic Kira that he thinks he found a cure for the virus.
Is he just talking to her to talk?
I think he is, and I think...
And so we know what's happening as the audience?
We know what's happening, but I also think, one, there is an understandable component that's like, there's another person here with me, I'm still talking to them, even though I understand logically they can't understand me. Like, it's very like how we talk to our pets when they're in the room, you know? Like, not like in a way of like, we also talk to our pets to have a conversation with them, but I mean literally just in the like, what are you doing? Where are you going? Kind of like, it's
how'd you get to be the cutest baby?
But I also think I remember noting watching that moment that Nana does a great job making it clear on her face she has no idea what he's saying.
She's like trying to listen, but it's like I'm getting nothing, buddy.
Yeah. So I thought that was good.
Yeah. And then on the docking ring, Odo seals off Jahil's ship and manually blows the docking clamps with just seconds to spare. Quark is counting down, increasingly stressed. The ship is launched from the station where it explodes harmlessly in space.
And I love the explosion sort of like rattles the station. Yeah. And I love Quark and Ops accidentally grabbing onto an unconscious Benjamin Sisko to like hold himself up and then realizing and switching to holding onto a railing. It's just such a great little comedic beat. And I'd be curious if that was something he was told to do or something Armin Shimmerman just did.
I just also love that both Odo and Quark, the second everyone's safe, are immediately like, let the record show, I don't give a shit about you. Like, these bitches are in love.
They're so in love. And so we cut to Ben delivering a station log explaining how Dr. Cermak was able to cure everyone of the virus using Julian's notes and his own memories of working with Deacon Elig on the original virus. And as things begin to return to normal, Sisko welcomes O'Brien back to Ops. He orders a black coffee from the replicator, only to spit out the contents and yell for Chief O'Brien.
Poor Chief
O'Brien.
And he's like watching Ben, like, it's gonna work. Is it gonna work? And then, no.
Unfortunately, you can have good coffee or you can have an aphasia virus, or you can have bad coffee or an aphasia virus. Those are your only options.
It's the only black and white like binary in the system, really.
Yeah, either the coffee's shit or we're all going down. So you pick one. And roll credits! Which really felt rather sudden to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess just going straight into our final analysis, what we thought about the episode as a whole. I will just take that. I felt like the pacing was weird.
Yeah.
Overall, I liked the episode, and I liked the episode a lot more than I remembered liking it. One of the things I'm really enjoying about doing this show is spending so much time with each episode really gives me a chance to find the things that are great in each little moment. Because I think this episode is a little bit more, I wouldn't say filler exactly, but it's a little... It's playing with less interesting, like, big questions, I would say, than, like, for instance, what was the Konma episode?
Past Prologue.
Which was really, like, digging into, like, the socio-political, all of that. Like, this one doesn't quite have that to it, but it's still a lot of fun. And when you're watching through multiple times and taking notes and all of that, it really highlights the parts that are fun. So this is one of the things I'm appreciating about doing this show with you. But I do think the pacing was weird. very similar to last week's episode with the clone murder. It felt like the episode just built up and up and up to speed and conflict and tension until, with the last 2 minutes to go in the episode, it's all fixed. And then we kind of have a station log explaining how it was all fixed.
Yeah.
And I think we could have used more time for the denouement, for sure.
I think this is not unique to DS9.
No.
I think this is something you see with Trek, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. But it's just, I think it's especially noticeable in a show that is so character driven, and we will see less and less of this, I think, as Deep Space Nine finds its footing. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot more of this in season 1, but then as we continue on.
Yeah, I agree with the timing, still being something they're working out. I do think it's a great balance of comic relief and serious times, especially with Quark and Odo and their odd couple bit in the climax of the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of behind the scenes stuff to go over, I found this after I had already taken some of my notes earlier. So we had talked about how Colm Meaney especially really showcased that felt like he knew what he was saying when he was stricken with the aphasia. And I found something from an interview with Michael Piller, who's one of the main writers on DS9 and was a writer on this episode, Michael McGreevy. We got two mics. Michael McGreevy, who was also a writer on this episode, confirmed that while he had initially written actual gibberish for the characters to speak, he sort of quickly realized that this wasn't actually going to work for the episode and went back and basically wrote out the actual dialogue that the characters would be trying to speak and then transposed that into gibberish words that maintain the same rhythm. And so I don't think it takes away from the strength of the actors' performances, because I still think that's really impressive to memorize two scripts of the same moment essentially in different languages and then play one while you're playing the intention for another. Still takes a really impressive work, but it makes more sense how they were able to do that, knowing that someone had written out for them what they were actually supposed to be saying. So I just thought that was a good thing to note. Also, one thing that I think is interesting, Michael Piller, the writer, he had noted in an interview that a version of this story had been around for at least 5 years before this episode got made as a potential TNG story, which I think makes a lot of sense because this plot feels extremely TNG. And as we said, even the original series with the ooh, something bad got on the ship and now we're all trapped in here with it.
Yes,
it's very the episodic, classic Trek vibe.
It put me in the mind of The Naked Time, which is the original, Sulu fencing shirtless. We're all going
the polywater
crazy.
Intoxication, which is then that was the one that in season 1 of TNG we redid. So yes, it felt very, very.
It was very much that. Yeah.
This episode is also a favorite of Quark actor Armin Shimmerman, who has commented publicly that this episode felt like when he really started to understand his character. I found a quote from him that said, this is the character. This guy who likes to have a good time, who enjoys life, who feels that no problem is insurmountable. And that fun-loving spirit and delight becomes ingrained in my character at that moment. And so I really love that because especially in this episode where we talk about Odo as being someone who really struggles with anxieties when he's pushed outside of his comfort zone, Quark is a con man. He's an improviser. He's you
roll with it.
He is so good on his feet, and that translates to not just black market situations, but also sometimes a real Starfleet kind of crisis. And I think it's really fun the way that we see that in this episode.
Very much so.
Did you have anything that stood out to you in this episode in terms of production design, costume design, anything you want to highlight visually or in terms of design work? Those mugs, they're really good.
Mugs. I love your mug.
Thank you. Yeah, and I also love, so the one that I have is one that we will see more later. I guess I can't say when we will see it because that's kind of a spoiler, but
it will return. The mugs will return.
Yeah, and so there's there's the one that we see in this episode, the one that I have, and then there's a third design with kind of a longer stem. And all three of those will be in rotation as like consistent DS9 mugs, depending on where they're drinking at, whether it's at Quark's or the Replimat or whatever. And I do just really love the distinctiveness of them. It's always been a thing. In TNG, we have the like very distinctive like glass cups with the plastic handles that are become very associated with that show. And I love establishing early on like a visual language for what the plateware, glassware, I don't know what you call it exactly, but what that looks like on Deep Space Nine. Yeah. And they just look cool. They look fun to drink out of. That's why I bought myself one.
As you should.
Anything else?
Nope, that was it.
All right. Well, thank you guys all so much for joining us for this episode and our discussion of Babel.
We have one final segment left in today's episode, a little something we like to call Consulting the Orb of Prophecy, where we look ahead into the future of the series and discuss spoilers that relate to this week's episode.
If you've watched Deep Space Nine before, or just don't mind spoilers, stick around after we sign off for that discussion. If you're watching along with us for the first time and don't want to be spoiled for future episodes, you're going to want to hop off after the sign-off.
The Star Trek Deep Space Nine Parmac cast is recorded in San Diego, California, and produced by us, as well as our stage manager, Peter.
A big thanks to friend of the show, Matt, who produced our theme music, and to Tumblr user at GrandCon221B, whose Star Trek pit crew was used to generate the avatars of us featured in the show's cover art.
New episodes drop every week on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
If you have any questions, comments, or would like to chat with us about Star Trek, you can email us at ds9cast@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Instagram and Twitter at ParmacCast for updates and memes.
Last but not least, if you're enjoying the show, please review it and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. It really, really helps other folks to find the show. And please join us next week for our discussion of Deep Space Nine, Season 1, Episode 5, Captive Pursuit. Bye. Bye. See you next time. Welcome to our segment called Consulting the Orb of Prophecy, where we move outside the confines of linear time and look ahead to things which have not yet occurred.
The destiny we were always destined to take.
Precisely, Steph, precisely. So, TBH, there wasn't a ton to talk about this week for Prophecy, but one of the big ones that stood out is just that Odo has his line about he caught on to Quark's shenanigans after Quark mentioned that Rom fixed the replicators for him, and he has this great line where he's like, Rom's an idiot, he couldn't fix a straw if it was bent, which is very, very funny. But as you know, if you've seen the show before, Rom is an innate mechanical genius.
Literally, like, the genius engineer of all time.
And he's sort of like, he is an idiot, don't get me wrong, but like that is his way of sort of like exploring self-worth later on in the show. Is kind of his arc, is like he discovers that like, I may be stupid, but I can fix a toaster better than anyone. And it's like it's just very interesting that like how much they hadn't figured that character out at all yet, because even before we really get it as an arc about self-esteem for him, he does sort of become Quark's like Radio Shack boy. Like he's always like fixing the bullshit at the bar.
It's funny, it's such a throwaway line, and yet.
Yeah. And then the other thing was just, you know, we talked a little bit about how this episode might have worked better if the relationships had been more mature by the time of going into it. And just to talk a little bit without the confines of the no spoilers about Miles and Julian's bromance is one of the foundational relationships of the show. I mean, it really is a load-bearing relationship starting in like season 2 onward, and it feels very how would I put it? it feels like a stark omission in this episode. It feels to me watching it like something is missing.
Knowing where it's
Knowing
going
where
to
their
be.
relationship is going. Yeah, the fact that like it's an episode that starts with O'Brien coming down with a mysterious illness and Julian having to figure out what the deal is, yet there's no real meaningful interpersonal reaction between those two, or interaction between those two, feels very, very strange, I think.
It does.
And I would have really loved if we had gotten the chance to have some of that in this relationship in this episode, because as we said, I don't think the Jake and Ben of it all works super well. There's just not a ton of it there. And frankly,
There's not enough. Yeah.
Sarah Clofton is early on in acting and
Literally a kid.
He's not at Avery's level. And that shows in some of the scenes in this episode, which is not, that's how it be with child actors sometimes.
He
and
was
you
like
have to like
11,
work around that as a production team on a show. And then the other one, Quark and Odo, is a very different kind of relationship, right? Like their love is antagonism, and so it's not the same sort of
dynamic.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about that before we hop off?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Bye.
See you later.